My name is Jesse Mazur. I'm the Senior Director of Engineering for Cozy. Within the spectrum of Meredith, we are the digital paid products division. So we don't own only Cozy, we own a couple of different apps. Cozy's the flagship. It's sort of like a family organizer. So you have calendars and lists and meal planning. So mom and dad import their calendars, and the kids' calendar gets imported as well, maybe from school. And then like when Susie has karate practice, but Jimmy has to be at band practice, and mom has a dentist appointment, and oh my God, who's going to pick up the kids? So we solve that problem, and there's a lot of lists involved as well, shopping lists, to-do lists, that kind of thing, meal planning, what's for dinner tonight. And then because we already have kind of what's for dinner tonight, we also own something else called Cooking Light Diet, which is another brand owned by the overlords. And we have two things, and we realized that if we have two things and we want to generate apps from both of them, we need to build a platform that can generate apps rather than having an army of iOS devs, an army of Android devs, an army of web devs, all building different platforms for two different apps. That would be 6 code bases across 2 apps if we had them all separate. So we decided to change our mission to this, which I tried to make as succinct as possible, but basically with 2 apps that have a lot of common features, we thought, what if we just build a platform that has reusable components that we can then deploy into given apps and then compile those and spit them out as applications, whether they're mobile or web. So some of our vision involves React Native, which I will not get into for the purposes of this group, but it's kind of, so much of the technology is the same anyway. But the Cooking Light Diet app also has a concept of a calendar because it gives you a meal plan for the week. It has lists because you have to go shopping to buy food for the meal plan. So a lot of overlap in those features. So what if we just build a single calendar feature with all the things we need and then deploy that to both apps, etc. So it's kind of how we got to something like this. So this is way zoomed out, and I'm going to slowly zoom in over the next couple of slides. And I apologize to all of my engineers in the room who are actually building this because it's way oversimplified and I'm probably going to get about half of it wrong. But you can imagine, so mostly what we'll be talking about in the context of the few minutes I'll be up here is the blue boxes. Those are each separate, we'll call them modules written in React. They would each contain all of their own actions and reducers, their own containers, their own templates, basically everything you need to have the entire component run as if it were its own app. And that way you can then maybe make a NPM package out of it and then have dependencies on several of these and pull them into a single location, and boom, there's your app. All you need is a shell app that you can then duplicate and pull all these pieces in and then kind of figure out your navigation and information architecture, and you've got an app. So we'll be talking about the blue boxes just to kind of fill you in through the rest of the stack, so that it makes sense. Green is sort of like a middle layer, things that are not necessarily services, but maybe aggregate that pull in other different services or massage the data into the shape that we need it to be in for the module to run correctly. The orange in this case are microservices. So in the example of the calendar, you can see how it's pulling in from the skinning middleware, because we obviously have a lot of brands. We don't want the calendar to always be blue. Maybe it needs to be green and a different icon or a different font so that a different app can launch and looks slightly different. But it also, one of the lines is going all the way through back to that calendar box by itself. So the calendar is also talking directly to the service that sort of makes it work. And then in some cases, some of those services are backed by third parties, which I just have here as sort of those gray cylinders to the right. So we might make subsequent calls, like for identity, we're actually going to use a third party for an identity service provider. So this is one step in now. We've zoomed in we're not at 10,000 feet, we're about 1,000 feet now. So this is the overall app architecture. The only thing that doesn't really apply to this group is the gray. That's all kind of services stuff, but you can imagine, I'm sure if any of you, I'm hoping most of you have built some level of React apps before. A lot of this probably looks pretty familiar from a React architecture, other than my names for certain boxes and certain arrows may be a little messy. But the app loads. The one thing we're doing is checking whether you have an active session or not, and if not, we have to obviously make a service call and log you in. But branding comes in, and we basically load a theme file. We load your account, and then navigation wraps the app, and then you have the app running. On the bottom, I think it gets cut off here. Does it get cut off? Yeah, okay. So the orange box at the bottom, there's a word that says modules, which is not visible to you. Those are those encapsulated pieces that I was talking about that each have all their own thing. So I've written a few here that are kind of really relevant to what we're currently working on: meals, lists, calendar. Obviously, most apps have some kind of a settings page, etc. So a module specifically, which is about as zoomed in as we're going to get, is encapsulated. And what I mean, like I said earlier, is that maybe these are their own standalone plug-and-play sort of NPM packages. Inside of each one are the containers, the actions, reducers. They have their own sagas that can then sort of register themselves with the sort of, what do they call it, combined, sagas, so that the app has knowledge of everything that's going on. They have all their own templates. I think I get to it in a future slide, but we're using Material UI. So in some cases, our templates then rely on a more abstracted layer of like the Lego building block pieces that come together to create the templates that we're using in the apps. And then we have our own kind of business needs. So if we're going to build a platform that's for an enterprise as large as Meredith, which is sort of a publicly traded multi-billion-dollar company, we have to adhere to a lot of bigger standards that aren't just make it work for us. So things like localization, right? People en español is in Spanish. We have brands that publish in British English, so we have a random U generator that we just pop some letters in. Accessibility is really important. Obviously, that's not just because we want to do the right thing, but also because there are legal ramifications in this country if you don't. So if you work for a large enterprise, you've probably dealt with this before, but you can definitely be sued if you are not accessible. And then instrumented for metrics. So in this building, we share with All Recipes as well as the business intelligence unit of Meredith. So as a stakeholder in our application, obviously all the apps need to be instrumented in such a way that when they're out in the wild, I give a real world example. Better Homes and Gardens is one of the brands that we own. If they want to know how their customers are using the app and we haven't instrumented it that way, they cannot then go to our data warehouse and pull the behavioral metrics they want to understand what their customers are doing. So we have inherited some requirements from the mothership that are outside of the technical realm. So I just wanted to call that out as like things we have to think about as we're building these pieces. Here's the boxes and arrows of a given module. So again, for those of you that have built a lot of React, this probably looks very familiar to you. Again, there's the Material UI that we're pulling in to create our components. So that, I should have maybe grayed that box out. And then obviously sagas are making calls to external third-party services. So that box is great because that's out of the scope. That's one of my other teams that does that. I don't know if I need to get in too much of the weeds on this. This probably is pretty boilerplate React stuff. So if we can do this, if we can make this into an NPM package with using something like a private NPM repo, GitHub is betaing that right now, for example, then we also don't have to make it external so that anybody can use our proprietary code. So if this was an NPM package or something similar to it, then we could take this single piece and plug and play it with all of its other siblings, and we'd have apps. That's basically what we're setting out to do. And then here is it in the context of the app, our flagship app, the Cozy app. So again, oversimplified here, but a calendar module is pulled in. So one of these that means calendar is the calendar box, right? And then a list box that does the same thing, tasks, to remind you to take out the trash or to change the air filter in your HVAC system. what's in there? It's hard to see from here. Meals. So what's for dinner tonight? The green boxes are the green ones I tried to color coordinate from several slides ago. Those are the middleware that my services team probably takes care of. So this could be an example of a bunch of plug-and-play pieces all written as standalone React modules that are then pulled in to create a single application. And if I zoom out one layer from here to go to the mothership, we've got some other ideas. So Travel and Leisure is another brand that we own. And maybe we build, again, you see calendar comes up because when you are traveling, you probably need to know when you're traveling. So again, another use case for a calendar. In their case, probably they want some kind of a city guide or some kind of a place to give you a guide about the place you're going. So we'd build some kind of a places or a city module. Another one, Better Homes and Gardens, which is somebody they'll probably be the third tenant on our platform once we launch the 2 that we own. They need calendar because how do you know when a certain plant is in season if you don't have a calendar to map it against, right? Lists, again, because you need to go shopping for seeds or remember the to-do list of what you have to do in your yard. Tasks to remind you to water the grass. And in this case, some sort of a plant informational module. So out of scope for this, but Meredith has a giant graph store of every single brand and every single article created across the entire enterprise put into a single place, and then basically entered in via a headless CMS. And then they've built their own front-end rendering engine for it that pulls it all out so you can see the same article on different websites rendered identically and you don't realize, but those are all just part of the Meredith family. So we would have to make a way to render that in our system as well. So we'll probably have to build a module that renders the proprietary Meredith sort of UI JSON blobby thing, and then all of a sudden we have content rendering. So a couple of examples of how this scales outside of like what we're specifically trying to do. So that's basically it in a nutshell. It's kind of what we're trying to do. With some really clever architecture, we might be able to kind of actually realize a vision like this. And the gap to building it is simply you get a new request from somebody and they say I need A, B, and C, and we say, oh, we already built A and B. We already have calendar and lists. We just don't have that plant thing yet. So we're just going to build the plant module for you. So the time it takes to build a brand new application from scratch is weeks instead of months or even years, because you're not rebuilding a bunch of different things from scratch every time. You're just saying, cool, I need A, B, C, and D. I don't have D, so we're going to build D. A, B, and C are done. Compile that all together, ship the app, on to the next. Step 3, profit. So the hardest part about doing all of this, I'm about to get sales pitchy, I apologize, is I need an army of engineers to do it. We're building it in React. I'm looking at an army of React engineers right now, so I'm just going to leave you with a little subliminal message. Please look at the screen. Questions?